Oh, friends, you have been so patient. I was waiting for the book to show up at my house. My friend lent it to me. Everyone can say, "Thanks, Miss Wimberger's friend." Here, at long last, is the book that we can start together. Rosie Revere and the Raucous Riveters. Raucous Riveters. You might need to talk to your grown-ups about what those words mean. Raucous. If I read it kind of like raucous, does that give you an idea of what it might mean? You can take a guess. It's part of a series called The Questioneers, which is so cool because you guys are many things. You are artists and scientists and meteorologists and writers and illustrators and mathematicians and programmers, and through it all, you are also questioneers. So I wonder what it will mean in this book. By Andrea Beatty, illustrations by David Roberts. I want you to notice something. On the cover, do you notice what's in the background? See if you can get a close-up of that. And then also, that's what's the end papers. That's what's on the end papers as well. I wonder if that looks familiar to you at all. I have to tell you, I've not read any of this book. I just heard about it and I wanted to read it to you guys, so I asked around. So it'll be a first for all of us. And that paper is again on the next page, and I wonder if it's giving us a hint about anything. If you have any guesses, feel free to let me know. And it says here, "This notebook belongs to Rosie." The dedications are for Anna and Alexandra. I love you. That's the author. And the illustrator said for Chad W. Beckerman. Chapter 1. It says here, squirt, pressure, tube. Do snakes like ketchup? Snake. Hey. Chapter 1. Rosie Revere put on her safety goggles. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Ready," said Ada Twist. "Ready," said Iggy Peck. They signaled the thumbs up from behind the kitchen counter. "Here goes," said Rosie. She hit the big red button on the countometer. A scratchy computer voice blared from its speaker. We maybe could pronounce that countometer, but I think it's countometer. They're writing it as a hyphenated word. Can you see that right there? Countometer. "Countdown! 5!" Rosie ducked into her safety booth. 4! She flipped open her notebook. What would the next number be? 3! She pulled her pencil from behind her ear. 2! Suddenly, Gizmo flew into the kitchen and landed on the contraption. "Duck!" yelled Rosie. Gizmo chirped angrily. "I know you're not a duck!" yelled Rosie. 1! The three kids dived for Gizmo just as, boom! The contraption exploded. Splat, splop, slurp. Sticky red glops of ketchup flew everywhere. But Gizmo zoomed ahead of the storm. She soared up, up, and out of the way. She looped the loop and gently landed on the refrigerator. "Zowie!" said Ada, wiping ketchup from her goggles. "Yikes!" said Iggy, wiping ketchup from his sweater. Said Rosie, tapping her pencil on her notebook. Rosie looked at the mess and wrote a quick note. And it says here, "Testing in kitchen. Bad idea." I love how the illustration, it looks like a real piece of tape, doesn't it? That's just part of the artwork. Chapter 2. And it says, "Snake problem," with lots of question marks next to one of the snakes. Ada and Iggy had been helping Rosie all morning. She was trying to invent something for her uncle, zookeeper Fred. Uncle Fred had a big snake problem, and a little snake problem, and a green snake problem, and Uncle Fred had an every kind of snake problem. Every kind of snake in the zoo loved him. They slithered out of the cages and into his office. They hid in his desk, in his pockets, even in his lunch. One day, a smooth green snake named Vern hid in his sandwich. Uncle Fred thought that Vern was a wiggly pickle and almost took a bite. After that, Uncle Fred called Rosie. She invented a contraption to scare away snakes. She called it the snake away. And because it's kind of a name of something that she's invented, she gets to make it two words and then it's capitalized. That each of the words in the one word is capitalized. She called it the snake away. It failed. She tried again and again and again. Rosie invented 5 models. They all failed, but she did not give up. Uncle Fred needed her help. Rosie had hoped that the snake away Model 5 would do the job. She looked at the mess. The fake snake on the table was covered in ketchup. It looked like a gigantic striped French fry with fangs. Uncle Fred would not like an invention that left ketchup all over his desk. He was a mustard kind of guy, and besides, it might attract ants and possibly French fries. There's a lot of detail in that illustration, and if you look really closely, you can see how the illustrator did, David Roberts did texture and patterns. Ooh. Even the wastebasket, my friends, look at that. Has a little illustration on it. It almost looks like Snoopy. Rosie added some notes about her testing, so you guys can imagine now what her notes look like, right? It says here, Model 1, fabulous flop. Model 2, magnificent mess. Model 3, creative catastrophe. Model 4, distinguished dud. Model 5, ketchupy kerfuffle. Friends, there is that alliteration again. Ever since we started talking about it last week, it's showing up everywhere, and I think you guys are going to wind up being alliteration noticers like crazy now. The 3 friends cleaned up the mess. Then they shared peanut butter and honey sandwiches and talked about why the test failed. After lunch, Ada and Iggy went home, and Rosie kept working. She looked at the contraption. A tube had exploded because a kink in the line blocked the ketchup. The pressure of the ketchup built up until, boom! Aha, said Rosie. She jotted down ideas to fix the problem. Snake away Model 6 would work better. She was sure of it. Well, she was almost sure. There was only one way to find out. She would make changes to the machine and test again. Friends, do you notice that look at all these models they've tried. And they did not give up. They could have just said, Model 1, oh, forget it. We've tried 2 models by now. We're not just going to do it anymore. I give up. They just kept going. They're working on the 6th one now. Rosie was about to start when she heard a familiar whirring, purring, clanging, banging sound and looked out the window. It was great Aunt Rose. Rosie stuck her pencil behind her ear, crammed her notebook into her pocket, and ran outside as Aunt Rose landed the Helio cheese copter in the yard. Hey, called Aunt Rose. How's my favorite engineer? Aunt Rose hopped out of the aircraft and twirled Rosie around in a giant hug. My new invention is a disaster, said Rosie. Brilliant, said Aunt Rose. Sometimes I say aunt and sometimes I say aunt. It's pronounced A-U-N-T, which is aunt. But like we have an aunt in our family that we call Aunt Irene. I don't know, my friends. I'm just going to mix it up. Brilliant, said Aunt Rose. Tell me about it on the way. Are we going somewhere? Asked Rosie. You bet we are, said Aunt Rose. And there's no time to lose. This is an emergency. We'll read one more chapter. Chapter 3. So it says here, things with gears. 1, cars. 2, bikes. 3, clocks. 4, cheese copter. And it's got words like counterclockwise goes this way, clockwise goes this way, and counterclockwise goes this way. Gears. That may wind up showing up not in the right direction for you guys. I don't know. Okay. Chapter 3. Rosie put on her helmet, and Aunt Rose hit the switch. The cheese copter sputtered and twitched. It jumped and bumped. It shot into the air, and off they flew. They zoomed over the neighbor's garden. Woohoo! That's a doozy, said Aunt Rose. Indeed, Mrs. Lou's garden was a doozy. She was a master gardener, and it showed. Do you guys know what a master gardener is? When you think of the master of something, do you think they're not that great at it, or terrible at it, or a little bit good at it, or a lot good at it? Each year, she planted flowers and grasses to create a giant scene in her yard. This year, her plants looked like a giant goose. Daisies, asters, and marigolds painted the picture. Tall, fluffy pampas stalks completed the scene. They swayed in the breeze and made the goose come to life. Rosie looked down just as someone ran into the garden shed wearing. Let me try that again. Rosie looked down just as someone ran into the garden shed wearing a long duster, a big hat, dark glasses, and rubber gloves. It was Mrs. Lou. Rosie knew two things about Mrs. Lou. One, she was mysterious. Rosie never saw her outside during the day without her disguise. Two, she did not like Rosie. Mrs. Lou never said that. By then, she never said anything to Rosie. They were neighbors, but Mrs. Lou never even waved at Rosie. Once, Rosie saw Mrs. Lou in the window and waved. Mrs. Lou closed the curtains. Rosie had another clue. All the neighbors knew that Rosie was an engineer. They left recycling treasures on the curb for her, but not Mrs. Lou. She kept her recycling in crates on her porch instead of the curb. She didn't want Rosie getting into the crates. Friends, I wonder if you have a picture in your mind of what Mrs. Lou looks like, because I now have a picture on the page. I'm not going to show you yet. She didn't want Rosie getting into the crates. Luckily, the recyclers, Bee and Bo, sneaked the crates to Rosie's porch when she was at school. Rosie was glad they did. The crates were full of gears and wire, tools and broken motors. Mrs. Lou didn't like Rosie, but she sure had great recycling. Aunt Rose steered the cheese copter up, up and away. Woohoo! Yelled Aunt Rose. I do love a fancy garden. Rosie looked back at Mrs. Lou's garden shed just as a pair of gloved hands snapped the curtains shut. Boy, here she is. Oh, friends, I'm enjoying this book so far. The next chapter is 4. The first word is, I can't tell you, it'll give too much away. It's just going to tell you the whole rest of the story. The first word is the.